Well, I wanted to talk to you because obviously you're in the placement HR, human talent acquisition space. I mean, what is your shorthand story for what you do at the QTI Group?
Yeah, so great question. The QTI Group is a full-service HR organization. So we like to summarize ourselves to say we've got 5 main disciplines. We've got a full-service recruiting line of business. We've also got a staffing, so temporary staffing line of business. We also have outsourced HR, so a PEO or professional employer organization service offering, as well as engagement surveys. And then that lastly brings us to our 5th business, which is the one that I lead up, which is our total rewards consulting business. So simply put, total rewards consulting, focusing in on our employers paying competitively and appropriately.
Well, that's something that's, of course, very important to anybody who might be listening to the Nonfiction Brand podcast, because while nonfiction branding is all about creating a package of who you are, what you do, and how you do it in a way that people in the greater universe understand so they can actually seek you out for exactly that, what you do, how you do it, and all that stuff. Pay is a huge thing, especially when it comes to people understanding their value or their worth, which sometimes are the same thing and sometimes maybe out of alignment. And I'm really excited today to have Summer Rector on. She's the Chief Operating Officer at QTI Compensation Consulting, and she's here to talk about not only what she does, but how what we're trying to do with nonfiction branding actually helps, hurts, or whatever her efforts in trying to get you a great job at the compensation levels you deserve. And dare I say, the total compensation levels that you deserve?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you honed in on that total, as there's more to compensation than tangible dollars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially now because, millennials like to get a bad rap for not having traditional values or slightly different priorities and stuff like that. But I think they're probably the first generation who understands total compensation value more than any other generation. Because in the past, look at my face, I've got some whiskers on my chin that happen to be a little gray in color. In the past, the compensation that we looked at was strictly salary, maybe salary plus a few benefits, but it was never the full calculation of total compensation the way that I think you're referring to, right?
Absolutely. So our team, we like to refer to it as total rewards. And so what is total rewards? I mean, it includes the tangible pieces that you can put a financial dollar to, such as your base pay, your incentive pay, your benefits. So medical, dental, vision, all of those where you can put a tangible dollar to it. But it also includes things such as your career, the leadership quality at your organization, the culture, your work-life balance. All those things are meaningful. And from an employer perspective, it can often be bucketed into these higher cost or lower to no cost items. But from an employee perspective, it can translate into, my value today, my financial security, my future value, my quality of life. I mean, it's hard to say which of these things are more important, as they're all important.
Well, I think that's a great way to look at it. And not a lot of people are necessarily doing the full calculation of what they are truly worth. And again, you and I have just met. I literally saw you speak at American Family Insurance's Dream Bank about a month ago, I think. And you had a very cool concept that I got instantly, because you coined a new term for what companies should be aware of when it comes to their pay brand. And so I'm a big one for coining words. I mean, if there's anything I do more than anything else, it's coin a word and put a TM on it. In fact, I think there's a drinking game out there that's all about that. But when I saw your talk about pay brand, it made total sense. Because if you're an organization, a company, or an entity that has a crappy pay brand, or people know that the compensation that you get is not worth the effort that's expected of you, that's a terrible thing. So your talk was primarily focused on employers, but I think there was a lot that employees can take out of that talk as well. Can you give us a quick take on what you meant by pay brand?
For sure. So when we use the term, or when I use the term pay brand, what I mean by that is what people believe about what an employer pays, how they pay, and why they pay the way they do, whether it's true or not. It's the story that's told, and the perception about these pay practices is what is, the reality of that employee, or maybe even that candidate that is assessing that employer in terms of their pay brand. So every employer has a pay brand, whether they are aware of it or not. And so it's really important that they try to take control over that brand where they may have lost it, as there's a lot of forces that are driving that, such as owners, shareholders, media, employees, candidates, pay websites. I mean, there's so many different forces influencing pay brand.
Well, that's a really important thing. And what you're talking about for companies is that make sure your pay brand is accurate and, enhances the value of your company from the point of view of employees. But that same type of brand thing applies to the employee themselves. And that's what we talk a ton about on this podcast, which is creating a nonfiction brand for yourself that is based truly on who you are. I like to call it the completely true, completely you brand, so that people, especially employers, can know of you in advance of meeting you. And maybe they don't know all the details, but your brand precedes you. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand about the value of branding for products, services, individuals, or companies, is that your brand in the marketplace precedes you into the room. And that preceding may be weeks, maybe months, or even years. For example, if we listed the top 50 Forbes 500 companies, or so the top 50 Forbes companies, and went down the list, people would have an understanding of where they think their pay brand is. Like, oh, I've heard they do really well by their people. Or I'm thinking of a company in town that deals in the health records space, and, oh, they're going to work you hard, but boy, they pay well. That type of, that stuff is in the market. And if you don't control that, you could be in very serious trouble. And again, this applies to your concept of pay brand for employers, but it also applies to individuals in developing their personal brands when you're in search of a new position at a job.
Absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to have you on the podcast for is to test out some of my theories and assumptions, because I like to pontificate, just ask anybody who knows me, but I do not have a problem with people taking issue with it or calibrating me if I'm a little off. So I'm going to make some big sweeping statements and you correct me where I'm wrong. Deal, Summer?
Sounds great.
All right. So I'm going to say, if you walk in and you've got two people up for a job, one of whom has well established themselves in the marketplace in which they work, and the other person has been a quiet, maybe powerhouse behind the scenes, who's got the leg up? I'm going to say the person who's got a little bit of a reputation, a little bit of profile in the space, a little bit of understanding of who they are, what they do, and how they do it. Am I right?
I would say that whether it's fair or not, you are right. And there is data to support that in terms of the individuals who do a good job of selling themselves, so to speak, are the ones that we see advancing further in regards to job opportunities and pay, whether or not that is right.
It doesn't have to be right, but it has to be true. And that's what we're talking about here. And truth can sometimes not be fair. I mean, let's face it. It's not fair that someone with 20 years experience can be outshined by someone with 5 years experience, but high levels of recognition within the industry. But it happens every single day. And I know a lot of people who are aged a little bit older take serious umbrage at that. Like, let's take LinkedIn, for example. I'm assuming that as part of your job, you're pretty active on LinkedIn, or you're aware of what's going on there and you see what's happening, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we can see a ton of younger people, just chronologically in age, doing a lot of video, doing a lot of posting of various different styles, doing a lot of activity and conversation and communication and engagement back and forth, up and down, all over the place. And then you've got this big void of people who don't do anything. And it's not fair that someone who has, let's just say is 10 years junior to you is up for the same position you might be. But that's what happens because they have actively demonstrated their value via things like LinkedIn posting, engagement, conversation, commenting, and all that stuff. And you can cry all you want, but if you haven't done it, that's on you. It's not on them. They're taking advantage of the free tools that are available to them. Those free tools are available to you as well. So why aren't you using those free tools? This is my question. And one of the things that I really want to encourage people to question themselves is, am I leaving money on the table by not taking these free tools and leveraging them for my own personal brand? And also to get me into the company that has the pay brand that I really want to work for.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think it's thinking beyond the tools as well into, self-reflection on what is my objective, what are my career goals, be it near-term, long-term, and how might I work to attain that? How am I going to, what experience, performance have I already demonstrated to qualify me for that? And if there's anything I need to work on to close that gap, okay, let's figure that out. But where one might be ready to go for an opportunity, then how can I leverage those tools that you're describing to put myself out there, build my nonfiction brand, my personal brand, to demonstrate that I am a solid candidate for this opportunity?
Do you find employers actively looking for self-made stars on social media as maybe not a primary thing, but as a net positive when they're assessing candidates?
I do. And I think that a lot of employers are evaluating their recruitment practices, and some of them may be switching only to social media platforms. I mean, it's definitely been a transition to heavy recruitment through social media platforms. And so employers and, recruiters want it as easy as possible. So to the extent that a candidate can package it nicely for them and explain, here's why I am qualified for this opportunity. Here's the value the demonstrated value that I bring to the table, making it fact-based, essentially building a business case as to why they should choose you. And the other thing I'll comment on, for all the advances in technology and social media, I still don't think it means the death of the cover letter. I think that's crucial. And that is a really great way to sell your brand to an employer.
This episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by Nonfiction Brandversity. It's a free Facebook group dedicated to the art and craft of personal branding, and we'd like to invite you. Just search Nonfiction Brandversity on Facebook and ask to join. You're in, guaranteed. I can't wait to see you on campus. That is really interesting to me because the more digital we get, the more valuable I think analog things like a cover letter or a face-to-face meeting are, because as everything gets digitized, that thing that isn't stands out more and possibly in a very positive way. So you brought the whole idea of the cover letters up. Can you give us some best practices on what you think people don't appreciate about cover letters but need to?
Well, not that I am an expert in my field, I'm primarily focusing on the total rewards consulting side, but speaking from experience in our recruiting efforts, I'd say that a cover letter that is brief, you want to not have a 3 or 5 page document there, keep it high level, focus in on what specifically interests you in both the employer as well as the specific career opportunity they have. I've seen some that are just these vague compositions about, lack of clarity of what a candidate is seeking. And I think that is a turnoff for employers. They want to know that you're specifically interested in them and in their specific opportunity. And then making it fact-based in terms of how you have relevant experience. And relevant doesn't mean that you need to have had experience in that direct job, but make it translatable? How does a different type of experience qualify you for this opportunity?
So again, it's about getting out there and demonstrating the essence or the pillars of your personal brand briefly in a cover letter that is customized toward the specific opportunity. Now, of course, a lot of us are probably going to have cover letters that have boilerplate language, a certain amount of it in there. But if you're creating a cover letter, should it be 50% boilerplate, 50% customized, or should it be 100% customized? Or is there a perfect ratio in your mind of what that should be?
Wow, that's a really good question. I would say it should be more on the customized than on the boilerplate. I think if you want to stick with some key outlines in terms of intro, thanking them for the opportunity to be considered for the position, go into what specifically interests you about the employer and the opportunity, and how your experience qualifies you for this opportunity, the value that you can bring, and then close with, thank you and next step. I think that is as boilerplate as it gets. From there, I would have a customized letter that really differentiates you from others in terms of, the specificity of the letter.
Because the more specific you make it to them, the more customized it feels, the more, you actually did some research, you care, you understand what we're about. And I've seen that backfire because some people think they've done the right research, and then they start talking about a program that actually that company doesn't really do it anymore because the company hasn't updated their website in 5 years. And while the website may have that this is project number one in our priority, that project may have been killed a long time ago or, dialed down. So there's a challenge in being specific without being too specific the wrong way.
Yeah, well, not in a cover letter, but in a recent interview, I was talking with someone about there was a candidate who had done some research and said, I understand your CEO has been with the organization 60 years, and really the CEO had not been with the organization 60 some years. That was the age of the company. So I think it's extremely important to do some fact checking and make sure that the assertions that are being made in the cover letter are accurate.
Well, and that's why I like to tell people, if you're looking for a company, follow them on LinkedIn, because what they're doing on LinkedIn may be the latest and greatest. And not only follow the company, but follow as many people from that company as possible, because you'll be able to see those people, what they're putting in their feeds. And all of a sudden you see, they had this big open house to the public and they've given XYZ dollars to Boys and Girls Clubs. And I happen to be involved in Boys and Girls Clubs. That's a great conversation starter, or things like that. That type of emergent information is available in social media. What's on the website may not have been updated in the last 365 days, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. Again, social media is your friend. And LinkedIn, well, let me ask you this question from a HR perspective. How many HR professionals do you think use LinkedIn on a daily basis to identify candidates for potential positions with their companies?
I wish I knew the exact statistic here. Roughly, I would say that those that are in a talent acquisition profession are likely using it on a daily basis. From a percentage-wise, I'd say majority, if not, nearly all.
Yeah, and that's why if you don't have a sufficiently fleshed out profile on LinkedIn, again, you're leaving money on the table. Now, a lot of people don't have that profile filled out because they really don't know how to do it, or they have that kind of Midwestern nice thing of, I don't want to talk about myself. And well, I'm here to tell you that LinkedIn is the one place where you're not only invited to talk about yourself, it's mandatory. It's table stakes. LinkedIn is where you post your resume, you post I don't want too much information, but you share of yourself. And maybe it's a little bit more guarded and more buttoned down than you would on Facebook or some other social media channel. But still, you should be sharing things that let people have a conversation with you before you have a conversation with them. So, for example, you can see on the wall behind me, I've got guitars, right? Anybody who has ever seen any of the videos that I put out that show the guitars on the wall, the second I see them, I go, yeah, you're a guitar player, right? Why do I have those guitars on the wall? Well, mostly because I don't want to have them in a case. I want to be able to play them. But also because I don't mind sharing that aspect of who I am with anybody who might see these videos or listen to the podcast or whatever else. It's a safe thing. People can say, hey, you're into guitars. That's a safe conversation thing. Golf. I mean, come on. Golf is almost a cliche business thing. If you're a golfer, then you have something to talk about with everybody else who golfs, which is a whole lot of people in business. So sharing those things in gentle ways and relevant ways on LinkedIn can give you an opportunity to personalize yourself in advance of your personal meeting with a recruiter, with a talent acquisition specialist, with an employer or potential employer, and with potential coworkers as well. Being a human being walking into a room is a whole lot better than being a resume walking into a room.
I completely agree with you. I mean, people want to connect. You know, it's human nature to want that connection, that sense of connection, the belonging. And so for them to be able to find that connection with you, you need to put yourself out there. You need to share some of those pieces. You want to be careful in the interview process that you're not oversharing, but you definitely want to put some of that out there. Completely agree. And the other thing that I'll say, you know, what I see in my job every day in both the compensation side as well as our business broadly in the recruiting side is this tends to be something that you touched on. Midwesterners may struggle with this a bit, but also women can struggle with this a bit more than men. Just looking at data that's out there. For example, we find that men are more comfortable qualifying themselves or applying for a position when they may not meet all of the qualifications, versus women tend to wait until they meet all of the qualifications before they'll apply. We also see that men are more comfortable having difficult pay conversations, so asking for a pay increase compared to women. And there's a lot to this, but my key takeaway is as a candidate from the employee perspective, if you find that this is something you are not naturally comfortable in, I implore you to try to gain comfort or confidence in it in order to help with closing the gap in some of those opportunity and pay inequities.
Well, knowing your value, knowing your worth is kind of a cottage industry for self-help books of all sorts. I mean, programs, workshops, you name it. And you're exactly right when it comes to the fact that women tend to perhaps not put themselves out there as hard. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, of course, calls it leaning into the business, leaning into the opportunity, leaning into the fact that I know I can do that job. Maybe I don't have all the credentials, but I know I could do it. Well, the truth is, that's what the interview is about. I mean, obviously, if you can get the interview based on what your resume says today, that doesn't mean you can't fill in a lot of those gaps verbally in the interview itself when people discover, wow, you're really smart, you're really fast, you can pick things up quickly. You haven't learned any bad habits in a certain area, which is good because we can train you to do it our way. These are positives. I mean, you have to look at a blank slate as not a negative, but as a positive. But ideally, your slate isn't entirely blank because you've already made them understand who you are, what you do, and how you do it via a personal brand that is completely you and completely true. And of course, that gets me back to the title of this podcast, the Nonfiction Brand Podcast. And we're right up at the end of the first episode of a 2-week episode pairing with Summer Rector, who is the Chief Operating Officer of QTI Compensation Consulting here in Madison, Wisconsin. And next episode, I want to go in deeper on that whole total compensation value equation. I want to get into the calculus of that with you, not only from the point of view of how an employer looks at it, but how you can look at it for yourself to understand your total compensation value. So again, for the Nonfiction Brand podcast, I'm DP Knudten. I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast so other people can find it. And Summer, how can people get a hold of you or someone at your organization if they have questions about preparing themselves for market or any new opportunities they might be interested in? Is there a way that they can get to know you or start a relationship with QTI?
Absolutely. So they can visit our website at www.qtigroup.com. Otherwise, they can find us on LinkedIn, social media platforms. We tend to spread the gamut there. Or they can send me an email at summer.rector, RECTOR, @qtigroup.com.
Well, there you have it. You've got a direct line to the COO of QTI Compensation Consulting. Take advantage of it, people, because shrinking violets don't get the really incredible jobs. I'm DP Knudten for the Nonfiction Brand podcast, and she is
Summer Rector.
And we'll be back at you next week with another episode. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.